Hello everyone. Shite intros. Now for many people that watch the channel, you'll know that I personally don't recommend the Yamaha HS range KRK Rockets or Bear Dynamic headphones for mixing and mastering in your studio. However, it's not because I don't think that they are not studio monitoring. And that is because studio monitoring does not exist. We know this because every speaker and headphone has their own sonic characteristic due to their own specific design. With headphones, you have design options such as closed back, open back, dynamic, electrostatic, planar, the thickness of the diaphragm, impedance, sensitivity, pad material, shape of the cups, size of the cups, and much, much more. All of these factors have a direct correlation in regards to how the monitoring is going to sound and also perform. We can all agree that. However, it is argued by many on the internet that there are certain deliverables for studio monitoring. Now, the difficulty with all of this, as much as we may agree on these points, is that none of these points have any quantifiable measurements or standards to base any standard upon. Let's go through the points that the internet mentioned. The first one, needs to have a flat response. In what room? An anechoic chamber? Rooms with certain dimensions? Rooms that are adequately treated? Is it a flat response at certain listening distances? Is there a dB tolerance per frequency? By flat response, do you mean just purely frequency response and no consideration into harmonic response? Do you mean flat as in a straight line, or do you mean far field, diffuse field? For headphones, do you mean Harman, B and K? And when you measure flat, do you measure using third smoothing, sixth smoothing, 12th smoothing? And the internet also mentioned low distortion as a standard. What level of distortion is deemed too much? What measurement are we using? 1K sine tone? Wideband sweep? And what type of distortion are we referring to? Total harmonic distortion, intermodulation distortion, or both? The internet also mentioned having a strong phantom centre, which in most cases requires very good phase coherence. So what level of phase coherence is determined as studio quality? How do we measure that and put a figure on it? The internet also said that it needs to be detailed and accurate. Detailed where? Soundstage, reverb tails, clicks, pops. Like accurate, what do we mean by accurate? Tonally, dynamically, spatially? The internet also mentioned a good transient response. What is a good transient response? Is there a minimal decay time or an optimal step response? The internet said that it needs to have a lot of headroom. How much is a lot of headroom? The internet also said it needs to be loud. How loud is loud? And at what distance are you measuring that loudness? The internet also said that it needs to have good low end. What is good low end? Is it tight, expansive, punchy? Is it clean? Is it coloured? And when we talk about clean, what level of distortion is deemed clean? Minus 80 dB, minus 70 dB, minus 60 dB. And in regards to low end, what are we classing as low end? Is it 40 Hz, 60 Hz, 80 Hz, 100 Hz, 120 Hz, 150 Hz? So as you can see, there is no set standard for what a studio monitor should be. It is essentially a marketing gimmick that has been created to sell certain products to a set demographic or a set target audience. And let's use Bear Dynamic and Dan Clark Stealth as a good example of this. One, Bear Dynamic, is defined purely as a studio headphone. The other, which is a $5,000 pair of headphones, is defined as a audiophile hi-fi headphone. Now, what I love about this discrepancy is that Dan Clark Stealth is tuned strictly to the Harman curve, and it also has very, very, very low distortion. Like it's just basically very, very, very well made. There's a reason why it cost £5,000. But like having listened to them in MSM Studio, I can tell you now that these things are the closest I've ever heard to headphones sounding like a pair of monitors. Like just like without anything, no crossfeed, no like real phones, no fucking anything. Just like stick them on your head, and it's just incredible. And not only do I think that, obviously MSM, who is one of the biggest engineers in the UK, thinks that. He has used them, and I think he still uses them. I think actually there was an Instagram post where I think he was in Greece and he was doing a mix on them portably. So for anybody to say that Dan Clark Stealth isn't a studio pair of headphones, it's pretty irrational, isn't it? And that obviously begs the question of, what makes the new Beyer Dynamic DT1990 Mark II more studio than Dan Clark Stealth? Do they have a flat tuning? No, nowhere close. They have a lot of recessed low end, and they have a big peak around 7-8K, which just makes them sound sibilant and needlessly bright. And then we get into the sticky point that if the Beyer Dynamics aren't tuned to Harman, then that means that they're tuned more to a hi-fi curve, which is based more on consumer listening and not studio critical listening for mixing and mastering. Their hi-fi curve is essentially made to enhance the timbre of the music, not provide accurate, natural playback of what was actually intended by the mix engineer and the artist. To be honest, it's a pretty odd tuning for studio use. However, it makes a lot of sense when you understand the design of a lot of these headphones. So if you look at a lot of measurements of Beyer Dynamic, you will find that in the low end, they distort quite a lot. So normally what you'll find with a lot of dynamic budget options, what they will do is they will actually recess the low end to not make the headphone work as hard and therefore not have as much distortion in the low end, which in turn doesn't work well when you need to EQ them to Harman. So you need that big low end boost for Harman, because what you'll do is you'll just compound the issue and you'll colour the low end even more, which means that you can't trust the low end. And in regards to the increased treble, it is basically a pseudo trick that many devices use to give the listener the impression that they have more clarity and detail, because by accentuating those upper kind of mid-range frequencies, what you'll find is that you'll have more sibilance. You'll hear the cymbals a little bit more. You'll hear high-end percussion. You'll basically think that you're hearing details that you've never heard before, when in actual fact what you're listening to is just a hyped sound. It's just the upper mid-range being hyped. The Yamaha HS range does the exact same thing. If you look at the measurements of, say, a Yamaha HS5, you'll notice that it has this kind of peak around like 1.5K, which is the most prominent kind of range of our kind of human hearing. So you'll pick up 1K more than really any frequency. You'll perceive that more than any other frequency. The HS range also has a brighter tuning, which gives many people the impression, like the Beyers, that they have more detail and more clarity. It's not more accurate, it's not more detailed, it is just a pseudo trick that many monitoring companies use to kind of deceive your perception and make you think that you have more detail, when in reality it's just hyped top end that will just fatigue you and make you create really dull sounding mixes. But then, having said all that, people will still argue,
yeah, but if you just tune them to like a studio target EQ curve, like use SolarWorks or Arc 4, twin off, like with your headphones, just like EQ them to Harman, you know what I mean? It'll be sorted, and then it'll be studio. Studio.
And that would then bring somebody like me to ask the question, well, if I EQ my Edifier S3000 Mark IIs, which are in front of me, and I EQ them to a studio target curve, and I have, say, the Kali LP8s that are in the Atmos room, and I tune them to the same studio target curve or whatever, then what are the differences? They are theoretically EQ'd the same, so why do they still sound different? Now, the differences have nothing to do with one being a hi-fi speaker and the other being a studio speaker. The differences that we have, even when they're EQ'd, are all down to the actual design of the speaker. If we compare my Edifiers versus the Kali LP8s, one uses a 8-inch paper woofer, the other uses a 6-inch long throw aluminium woofer. One has a soft dome tweeter, the other has a horn-loaded planar magnetic tweeter. One is front-ported, the other is rear-ported. They use different crossovers, different DSP, and that is just scratching the surface. But the most important thing to accept is that all the differences I mentioned here have nothing to do with being studio or hi-fi. It's all about speaker design. Now, many of you will be wondering, Paul, where are you going with this? Well, the reason that I'm pushing this point and I'm talking about it is because there is no part of a speaker or headphone design that dictates whether something is studio or hi-fi. There are no set standards whether a studio monitor must use certain material for its drivers or its cabinets. There is no standard of whether it has to be a two-way or an MTM or three-way, or whether the three-way system uses a coaxial design like the Kali IN5, whether it's passive like the Amphion, so it uses an external amplifier for lower distortion, whether it's ported, sealed, uses passive radiators, transmission line like PMC. So we can agree that there are so many varying factors that impact the final sound of a loudspeaker or a pair of headphones. And without none of these design choices following any standard or requirement, how can you categorise a speaker or a headphone into a set standard of studio or hi-fi or consumer grade? They are just made up terms that hold no weight. Also, manufacturers and distributors can pigeonhole a certain product in a certain way in the hope that you will buy it for that specific category. It's just all marketing bullshit. And then many may ask,
but why isn't there a standard? Why don't we have predetermined choices that categorise things? And basically, why can't something be studio and why can't something be hi-fi? Why haven't we done this? Why can't I say that my Biodynamics is studio? Why can't I say that my Yamaha HS5s are studio? They're in my studio. The studio.
Because, simply, sound is too subjective to pin a standard on. Not only do we all hear differently, having our own unique ear canals, we also have our own cognitive perceptions, and we all listen through variables that will alter the end result. With speakers, for example, those variables include your room, your listening position, speaker position, the kind of calibration you use, because they all sound different due to varying factors. Audio equipment is just too variable and too adaptable to be pigeonholed into like a use case scenario. The problem that we have is that in today's modern world, the term studio is just way too loose to define any audio equipment by. In this modern day world, really anything could be classed as a studio. You've got home studios, you've got business studios, I suppose this could be classed as. You know what I mean? It's not in my house, it's like a separate building. You've got production studios, you've got mixing and mastering studios, you've got recording studios, film studios, video content fucking studios. The term studio is just really, really wide and vague. Fuck, a room doesn't even need to be adequately acoustically treated these days to be classed as studio, nor does it even need to have any analogue equipment. You have completely in-the-box studios where an engineer has a MacBook Pro, an interface and a pair of headphones. Still class that as a studio in the modern day times. And that is because the modern definition of a music studio has changed due to the adaptation of modern technology. It's not like in the 70s where you needed a big console and a tape machine just to have fucking multi-track recordings. You don't even need to pay acoustic designers to custom build a room for you. You can simply get advice from somewhere like GIK, buy treatment from GIK, and then go on to Acoustics Insider. There's a podcast episode with JESCO. It's really good. I'll leave a link in the description. And then you can top that off with like your calibration. You could use like Sonarworks, Arc 4, Trinov. Like there's so many ways that you can make your room work, even if it's not the ideal space. And that is why in modern day times, a music studio is simply a room where music is recorded, produced, mixed, and mastered. But what makes it worse is that we don't even define it to music studio, we define it to studio, which essentially means that, you know, a studio is a place where audio is recorded, edited, processed. So in reality, any speaker or headphone can theoretically be a studio headphone. What you, yes, I'm talking to you, need to realise is that it's not the manufacturer or the distributor or the YouTuber that dictates whether something is fit for mixing and mastering. It's the user themselves that dictate its suitability. And that then obviously brings you to the big question, which is, Paul, how do I know whether a piece of monitoring is fit for the studio purpose that I require it for, whether it be, you know, tracking, mixing, mastering, producing? How do I know whether it's suitable for that purpose? The answer is actually very, very simple. When you are trying to do this as a profession, the only thing that should matter to you is translation. And the only way that you're going to know whether something translates or not is by physically working on it, by physically producing, by physically mixing on it, mastering on it, 5, 6, 10 mixes, and then taking that mix to other real world monitoring, sending it to clients and seeing how you get on, seeing what the feedback is like. Now, the internet, and especially certain new YouTubers on the scene, will tell you that speaker manufacturers are scam artists and that there are right and wrong ways of doing everything in speaker design. Don't listen to these guys. These guys are only on YouTube to try and sell you courses and give you very narrow-minded opinions, right? That's all they're here to do. My advice is not to think about whether a speaker is a sealed design, whether it's a ported design, whether it's front ported or rear ported, or whether it uses passive radiators, or whether it's transmission line, whether it has planar magnetic tweeters or whether it has soft dome tweeters, whether it has aluminium woofer or whether it's a 2-way or a 3-way or a 4-way. Like, you need to just take all of that aside. Honestly, all you need to do is get the speakers in the fucking room, get the best position for the desk, ensure that your room is adequately treated, get the right listening position for the speakers, then see if you can calibrate them to improve the tonal response and get them working better with the room, see if you can improve the phase coherence of the speakers. Arc 4 is really good for that. And then from there, you work. And you work and you work and you work and you work and you let your results be what makes your end decision. And that is the main reason why I personally, and it is just me personally, don't advise Yamaha HS range, KRK rockets, and Bear Dynamics, because I have actually worked on them and I could not get them to translate. However, just because I couldn't get them to translate doesn't mean that you won't get them to translate. However, if somebody's asking my opinion, which is all that it is, I am going to give my opinion based on my experiences, because that is the only thing that truly matters to me in my room, in my setup. Many people will tell you online that a sealed cabinet is theoretically, the best design for speakers because you'll get a faster transient response, better decay time, less resonances, and your low end will be faster, punchier, and tighter. However, just because the science tells you a certain thing doesn't actually mean that that's going to be something that's going to translate for you trying to mix professionally or master professionally or produce professionally or record professionally. Now, this is just an opinion, but it's a shared opinion from many people I know in the industry. The thing with a sealed cabinet is that sometimes the bass can sound a little bit too dry, a little bit too tight, and it doesn't really fill up the room. It's like 808s just kind of dissipate. Where if you use a ported design, which many people will tell you is wrong, you can't use a ported design. Even though Spike Stent was mixing on vintage, not rockets, but vintage KRKs for years and years and years. Serban is on quested ported speakers at the front, and the Proax, they're front ported as well. Yes, the technique of resonating a port, is a way of creating low frequency extension. It's not natural low frequency extension by, using a larger driver. So if you go from an 8-inch woofer to a 10-inch woofer, you're going to get more low end extension. That's going to be more natural way of doing it. However, the amount of people that use ports in studios that are mixing and mastering professionally is so widespread that what it shows you is that it doesn't matter. It's a design choice that doesn't really bear that much weight in the context of translation, which is the most important if you want to do this professionally. You could create your own 4-way speaker, fucking do your own fucking PMC copy and try and do your own transmission line and get all that right, and then stick the speakers in a room and it sounds like fucking garbage. And you're just like, on paper, this should work. And then you realise that the 4 drivers weren't adequately time aligned, which was skewing your image, it was skewing your transient response, it was skewing your low end, and then you've then got to try and find out how to get all those drivers accurately time aligned, which is something that people like Amphion and IK Multimedia with their iLouds have worked really, really hard on. That's why the MTM design could be really beneficial for a lot of rooms. The whole thing about the room doesn't really matter, just get the biggest speaker possible, is absolute bullshit. Audio is too subjective for that, and rooms are too variable. You know, just because something measures flat in an anechoic chamber has no fucking relevance to how it's actually going to sound in the room, how it's going to measure in the room. At the end of the day, if the clients are happy, that's all that matters. It's how you get to that point of your clients being happy and you being able to mix consistently and have that core translation which gets your clients coming back. You want repeat business, and the only way you get repeat business is by being consistent, and the only way you get consistent is by having a consistent playback system. And that's why I always recommend people to have more than one monitoring setup. Like, for example, it's crazy, and some people might see it as OTT, but I've got 4 sets of loudspeakers in here. I've got an Atmos room through there, and I've got the iLoud MTM Precisions, which are fucking incredible, in my Atmos room. And guess what? Even though they're all calibrated roughly to the same target, they all sound different. Like, all of these speakers have their own sound. If we take the PreSonus Era Studio 8s, they've got a really, really big waveguide, which makes them have this incredible sweet spot. It's like unbelievable how wide the sweet spot is, which is really good for tracking. I have a use for it. However, I don't really think they sound that great. I wouldn't really like to mix on them. However, they're another good reference. Like, I've learned them and I kind of know what to kind of trust and what not to trust. The low end isn't great. It's a bit fucking woofy and undefined. Where you get something like the edifiers that are, you know, hi-fi speakers, and I think they sound fucking incredible. It has this great separation, the transient response is great, the phantom center is detailed, the separation has this way where I can really pick out details of the mid-range. It's got nice front-to-back depth. I can hear reverb tails. For example, if you listen to Back in Black on the edifiers, you'll hear the kick, you'll hear the snare, the reverb tails, and then you'll hear the guitars wide panned. And then when the solo kicks in, you've got the solo right in the middle, and you can clearly define the rhythm guitars left and right, kick, snare, vocal down the middle. And I understand how it translates, and I understand how I can use it and how it should sound. That's also why I've got fucking so many pairs of headphones. I've got the Hyphamin and the Nanos that I use for low end, transients, you know, level decisions, and I've got the HE1000 SEs that I use for sound staging because they're so resolving. I could hear reverb tails, depth, and when it comes to panning and, you know, imaging decisions, it's just a breeze. I don't even need to think when I'm using them. I just know how things should sound on them. And what's interesting is that if you add Odyssey onto the mix, even though Odyssey and Hyphamins are both planar magnetic headphones, they both sound entirely different. The Odyssey MX4s have a different design. The Hyphamins I use are egg-shaped cups. They don't need crossfeed. The MX4s do. They have a round shape. I don't know if that's specifically why, or it's just the design of the headphones, but they definitely need crossfeed for me. They have their very, very specific sound. The Hyphamins are very wide, open, spacious, detailed. The Nanos are really detailed in the low end, where the Odysseys are really full sounding, thick sounding. Kicks have like a thump to them. And then, you know, even the fact that I prefer planar magnetic headphones doesn't mean that you can't use Sennheisers, doesn't mean you can't use the headphones. Doesn't mean you can't use Bear Dynamics, doesn't mean that you can't use the Sony MDR MV1s. I think they're fucking incredible for soundstage decisions. If you EQ them, you can actually find they could be quite useful. However, I wouldn't really judge low end on them. I just find a lot of dynamic headphones are a bit mushy in the low end, and they just don't have the clean, defined slam that planars can give you. But again, not all planars are equal. There's some planars that don't sound that great. I mean, if you take the Hyphamins and Dara closebacks, I think they're fucking terrible. Use them for tracking, but I wouldn't mix on them. And that's why I don't recommend, you know, KRK Rockets, because I had experience mixing on them. I had the 5s, I had the 6s, and I worked on the KRK Rockets when I was at college for 2 years in acoustically treated studios that were very well acoustically treated. And no matter what I did, I just couldn't get those things to translate. But I know other people that did. And, you know, just to give you a little bit more context, right? This is going to really piss off people, right? But it is what it is, right? I made an Instagram post ages ago, and I basically, you know, called out to lots of mastering engineers, and I wanted them to answer a question. And that question was, are there any monitors that you found in your career that tend to not translate that well? And this is in regards to mixers mixing on these speakers and then them having to master and, you know, fix, you know, issues that they hear in regards to translation. And out of 28 mastering engineers, all working, I'll say, mastering engineers, some big industry mastering engineers, 20 of them said Yamaha HS range. And there was actually another monitor. There was like 3 common ones. There was the Yamaha HS range, the KRK Rockets, and the M Audio BX8 that I've never tried, but apparently these translate fucking horribly. Now, this isn't, scientific fact or anything. It's just a quick poll that I did, but I think it's quite interesting that out of 28 professional mastering engineers that I spoke to, 20 of them identified that there were translation issues, mainly due to the monitors that the mixer or the producer was working with. In regards to the HS range, the common theme was that mixes were just too dull. They were just constantly having to brighten them. And I think, again, it's due to that kind of hi-fi kind of, that kind of brightness that they add in that mid-range kind of peak around like 1.5K. It's too hyped and it's making people soften their mixes. And with the KRK Rockets, the most common theme was that a lot of the mixes lacked low end and punch. I think because they're already quite punchy sounding, mixes kind of sounded really, really soft on them. And how the mix is interpreted to you in the room has a massive impact on the decisions you make. I made an entire speaker comparison on this channel, and I mixed with 3 different Calais, 2 different Focals, PreSonus, edifiers, and I got a different result mixing the exact same track, trying to reverse engineer a Mark Daniel Nelson track. And the reason I did that was so I knew exactly what I was hearing. Because if I did a different mix, then again you could say, well, it's dependent on the mix, it's dependent on the day. But I took the exact same multi-track and tried to reverse engineer it to sound as close to Mark Daniel Nelson's final mix and get as close as possible to that. And what was interesting was that I had 2 Focals in. I had the Focal Alpha Twins and the Focal Shape 65s. The Shape 65s, they translated quite well. The Alpha Twins, I could not get those things to translate. The translation was terrible. It was terrible. It was so dull. It was muddy sounding. It was couldn't mix on them. But again, there was people that commented that says, well, I've mixed on them professionally and I can make it work. Yeah, maybe it works on your room, maybe it works in your setup. At the end of the day, you've just got to find what works for you. Monitoring for mixing and mastering is all about compromise. There is no such thing as a perfect speaker or a perfect pair of headphones. They all have their strengths and weaknesses. It's just up to you to find out whether those strengths and weaknesses work for your setup. And please don't make your own speakers. Don't buy courses that tell you to fucking make your own speakers. Please don't do that, right? If you want to try out a pair of speakers, buy them from a distributor that'll send you to them. You can try them. Hopefully maybe get 30 days or a month or whatever. You can do mixes on them, make your own decisions, and then you can hand them fucking back and you've not spunked fucking $2,000 on a pair of speakers that sound shit because somebody made out that they knew how to fucking design a pair of fucking PMCs for under $2,000, right? The internet's the internet, right? I'm just trying to give you advice that I think might help you, right? Okay, I'm done now. Fucking hell. 1 hour 20 minutes. 1 hour 25 minutes. Right, okay, I'm done. Right, bye, la la la, step in a Christmas step, and together beautiful, never and ever. By the way, I never knew the words to that song. Oh, fuck it. Step in a Christmas step, beautiful,